This week takes us back to November 1939.
Yeah, a period where
It's the war.
the simmering tensions of World War II
Yeah.
really began to boil over.
Exactly.
This week truly sets the stage, I think, for the global conflict that would engulf the world for
Yeah.
years to come. We see the war at sea intensify,
Yeah.
the situation in Asia deteriorate, and the Nazi grip on Europe tighten, all while the specter of war looms over Finland.
Yeah, let's start with the Battle of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
The week begins with a small British victory, the sinking of a German patrol vessel.
Right. The HMS Sturgeon's success against the V209 in the Heligoland Bight,
Right.
a strategically important area near the German coast, provided a much-needed boost to British morale,
Yeah,
especially, in the early days of the war.
especially early, yeah.
Yeah.
But that victory was very quickly overshadowed by the relentless attacks on merchant shipping by German U-boats.
Right. These attacks focused on disrupting the flow of supplies to Britain were a crucial part of Germany's naval strategy. The sinking of several British trawlers like the Thomas Hankins, the Delphine, and the Sea Sweeper
Right.
highlighted the vulnerability of even small vessels to the U-boat threat.
And then there's the emergence of a new and terrifying weapon,
Yeah.
the magnetic mine.
Yes, these mines, detonated by the magnetic signature of passing ships, were incredibly difficult to detect and counter.
Right.
The sinking of the HMS Gypsy and the damage inflicted on the HMS Belfast, a newly commissioned cruiser,
Wow.
sent shockwaves through the Royal Navy.
Yeah.
They were forced to scramble for solutions,
Yeah.
leading to the development of degaussing techniques to neutralize the mine's magnetic triggers.
So degaussing essentially involved creating an opposing magnetic field around the ship to cancel out the mine's trigger.
Right.
It was a testament to the ingenuity and adaptability of Allied engineers in the face of this new threat.
Indeed, this technological innovation played a crucial role in mitigating the effectiveness of magnetic mines
Yeah.
and safeguarding Allied shipping lanes.
But the U-boats and mines weren't the only threats lurking in the Atlantic. The German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee returned to the South Atlantic after a relatively unsuccessful sortie in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, and adding to the Allied anxieties, the powerful German battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau embarked on their first wartime mission,
Okay.
commerce raiding in the North Atlantic. These heavily armed warships posed a significant threat to Allied shipping, stretching the Royal Navy's resources thin.
Yeah, this led to a dramatic encounter on November 23rd north of the Faroe Islands.
Yeah.
The British armed merchant cruiser HMS Rawalpindi, on patrol duty, stumbled upon the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau.
Yes, the Rawalpindi, a converted passenger liner, was utterly outmatched by the German battlecruisers.
Right.
Yet Captain Edward Coverley Kennedy, knowing the inevitable outcome,
Wow.
chose to engage the enemy. His message to his crew, "We'll fight them both, they'll sink us, and that will be that goodbye,"
Wow.
speaks volumes about the courage and determination of those serving in the Royal Navy.
The Rawalpindi was quickly overwhelmed and sank, resulting in a tragic loss of 238 crew members.
However, amidst the tragedy, the Rawalpindi sacrifice bought valuable time for the Allies.
Right.
Their distress signal alerted the British Admiralty to the presence of the German battlecruisers, forcing them to retreat and preventing further disruption to Allied shipping.
Shifting our focus to the war in Asia, we see a major setback for China, with the fall of Nanning to Japanese forces on November 24th and 25th.
Right. Nanning, the capital of Guangxi province, controlled vital supply routes from French Indochina, a crucial lifeline for Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government.
Right.
Its fall severely restricted China's access to international aid and supplies,
Yeah.
forcing them to rely on the treacherous Burma Road and airlifts over the Himalayas.
This loss underscored Japan's strategic advantage in the region. Their control of the sea and air allowed them to effectively isolate China and hinder their war effort. It was a devastating blow that would have long-term consequences for the Chinese resistance.
Indeed, the fall of Nanning marked a turning point in the Sino-Japanese War, highlighting the challenges faced by China in their fight against a determined and well-equipped enemy.
Now, turning our attention back to Europe, we see the Nazi grip tightening on occupied territories.
On November 23rd, a chilling decree was enacted in occupied Poland.
Okay.
All Jews over the age of 10 were ordered to wear a white armband bearing a blue Star of David. It was a deliberate act of segregation and humiliation,
Right.
marking them as targets for further persecution.
And in Czechoslovakia, following student protests earlier in the month, Nazi authorities executed 120 Czech university students on November 24th. This brutal crackdown on dissent sent a clear message.
Right.
that any resistance to Nazi rule would be met with swift and merciless punishment.
These events highlight the increasingly oppressive nature of the Nazi regime.
Yeah.
And foreshadowed the horrors that were to come.
Simultaneously, while tightening their control over occupied territories, Hitler issued Directive No. 8 on November 20th, outlining his plans for the invasion of France and the Low Countries.
This directive signaled Hitler's growing impatience with the stalemate on the Western Front. He saw the occupation of Belgium and the Netherlands as essential to achieving his strategic goals in the West.
Right.
And was determined to strike a decisive blow against France and Britain.
And as Germany prepared for war in the West, they also ramped up their propaganda machine, further escalating tensions with Britain.
On November 24th, they intensified their accusations against Britain,
Okay.
falsely claiming that British intelligence was behind the failed assassination attempt on Hitler in Munich earlier that month. This blatant attempt to demonize the enemy aimed to rally domestic support for the war effort.
Right.
And further fuel the conflict.
In response to Germany's escalating aggression, Britain took steps to counter their adversary, including a full blockade of German exports announced by Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain on November 21st.
This economic warfare strategy aimed to cripple Germany's war effort by cutting off their access to vital resources.
Right.
It mirrored Britain's tactics from World War I and signaled their commitment to a long and arduous struggle.
This week also saw the emergence of a new conflict in a remote corner of Europe, the Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union.
On November 26th, the Soviet Union staged a false flag operation, shelling the village of Mainila near the Finnish border and then blaming Finland for the attack. This fabricated incident served as a pretext for war.
Wow.
Reflecting Stalin's expansionist ambitions and willingness to use deception and aggression to achieve his goals.
The Soviet Union demanded that Finland withdraw its troops from the border, a demand that Finland refused, recognizing it would compromise their national security.
Right.
This set the stage for a David versus Goliath struggle, with tiny Finland facing off against the might of the Soviet Red Army.
Despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, the Finns, led by the legendary Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, were determined to defend their homeland. They were prepared for the harsh winter conditions and were known for their skilled and highly motivated army.
This unlikely conflict unfolding as the week came to a close captured the attention of the world and would have significant consequences for the course of World War II, further destabilizing the already fragile balance of power in Europe.
Yeah. As these events unfolded on multiple fronts, the ripple effects of the war began to be felt on the home fronts of nations involved.
Right.
And those still clinging to neutrality.
Yeah, indeed, the war was no longer a distant conflict for many. It was beginning to touch every aspect of life, even for those far removed from the battlefields.
In Britain, the gravity of the situation was underscored by the enactment of the Official Secrets Act on November 23rd.
Okay.
This act tightened control over government intelligence and limited the disclosure of classified information, reflecting heightened security concerns as the nation prepared for a prolonged war.
This further demonstrated the changing landscape of wartime society, where individual freedoms were often curtailed in the name of national security.
The realities of unrestricted submarine warfare also became more apparent on November 24th when the British government issued a stark warning to neutral nations about the dangers of navigating near the British Isles or the French coast. This warning came in response to the increasing difficulty in distinguishing neutral ships from British vessels. Particularly during nighttime conditions, making them susceptible to U-boat attacks.
So Germany's actions essentially declared a zone of unrestricted submarine warfare, placing neutral shipping at significant risk.
A gamble that could potentially provoke a backlash from neutral nations, particularly the United States.
On the British home front, the mobilization of resources for the war effort continued in earnest.
On November 22nd, the government launched a national savings campaign urging citizens to lend to defend the right to be free.
Wow.
This campaign encouraged people to invest in government bonds and savings certificates to finance the war, highlighting the growing economic burden of the conflict and the need for public support.
Even seemingly mundane aspects of British society were impacted by wartime measures, as illustrated by the relocation of New Forest ponies on November 26th.
Right. These ponies, typically roaming freely in Hampshire's New Forest, were deemed a traffic hazard during the nightly blackouts. Implemented to obscure potential targets from enemy bombers, it serves as a reminder of how deeply the war was affecting everyday life.
Across the Atlantic, the United States, though officially neutral, took steps that hinted at growing involvement in the conflict.
On November 21st, the U.S. government introduced new shipping regulations requiring American merchant vessels to obtain certificates of non-enemy origin known as navicerts before departure.
Okay.
This measure aimed to prevent American ships from unknowingly aiding Axis trade.
It was a delicate balancing act for the Roosevelt administration, attempting to limit economic ties with Germany while officially maintaining neutrality.
The challenges of neutrality were further highlighted on November 26th when the brand new U.S. Navy destroyer USS Yarnall ran aground off the coast of Virginia.
Okay.
Though a minor incident, it underscored the growing demands on the U.S. Navy as they expanded their presence in the Atlantic, preparing for the possibility of eventual involvement in the war.
This week, in November 1939, truly served as a microcosm of the larger conflict, showcasing the multifaceted nature of war
Right.
and its impact on various aspects of life reaching far beyond the battlefields. It demonstrated the brutality of war, the intricate strategic maneuvering, the propaganda battles being waged for public opinion, and the profound consequences for individuals regardless of their direct involvement in the fighting.
It serves as a stark reminder of the immense stakes involved, the sacrifices made by those who lived through this turbulent period, and the enduring legacy of World War II, which continues to shape our world today.
So as we've seen this week, in November 1939 brought the world closer to a full-scale global conflict.
Yeah.
These events at sea, in Asia, across Europe, and this looming threat in Finland really underscore, I think, a growing interconnectedness, where even nations striving for neutrality found themselves drawn into this web of war.
One of the most striking elements this week, I think, is the increasing prominence of the propaganda war being waged alongside the military campaigns.
Right.
We see Germany attempting to manipulate public opinion both domestically and internationally by blaming Britain for the Munich bombing and portraying their actions as justified responses to perceived threats.
On the other side, Britain also engaged in its own propaganda efforts to galvanize support for the war, emphasizing themes of national unity, shared sacrifice, and the defense of freedom against tyranny.
This battle for hearts and minds was fought not only on the traditional battlefields, but also in the media, through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and other forms of communication.
Right.
Controlling the narrative and shaping public perception became crucial aspects of the conflict.
Yeah, we also witnessed the difficult choices faced by neutral nations like Romania,
Right.
caught between the competing interests of the Axis and Allied powers. Their strategic resources, particularly Romania's oil fields, made them valuable targets for both sides, putting them in a precarious position where any decision could have significant consequences.
And the United States, while still officially neutral, grappled with its own increasing entanglement in the war. The introduction of navicerts for American ships demonstrated a growing commitment to supporting the Allies, even while striving to avoid direct involvement in the fighting.
As we conclude our deep dive into this pivotal week in November 1939, it's clear that this period serves as a microcosm of the larger conflict. We see the brutality of war, the intricate strategies employed, the propaganda battles being waged for public opinion, and the far-reaching impacts on individuals, nations, and the global order.
The events of this week foreshadow the challenges and the triumphs, the tragedies and the resilience that would define the years to come. It's a work that reminds us of the human cost of conflict and the importance of striving for peace and understanding, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds.
This week in November 1939 offered a glimpse into a world on the brink of transformation, where the decisions made and actions taken would shape the course of history for generations to come.